We've just heard there about the Delta strain and now that being a big concern for Queensland. How infectious is this Delta strain?
So the Delta strain is a real problem. If you remember when we were talking about the Alpha strain, it was 50 to 70% more transmissible than the original strain, and Delta is that again. It's at least 50, 60, 70% more transmissible than Alpha, and that means it's infecting 5 to 7 people per index case. So if you catch COVID, chances are you'll give it to, on average, 5 to 7 people. And that's significantly more than the original strains of the virus, and that's why it's such a concern in Australia at the moment.
So it's more transmissible, as you just laid out the raw facts there, but is it more deadly and is it resistant to the vaccines that we have on hand?
So I don't think it's more deadly at this stage, but it certainly is affecting younger people more. That's what we saw in India, and we're seeing now in the UK as well, with it going through schools. Remembering, of course, that children are not vaccinated in the UK. It isn't necessarily making those children particularly ill, but it's certainly infecting them more than the original strains did. In terms of the vaccines, the good news is that if you've had 2 doses of either of the vaccines that we have available in Australia, there's pretty good success at blocking this Delta strain. That's catching it in the first place of somewhere between 60 and 80%. So that's good news, but it does take both doses. If you've only had the 1 dose of either Pfizer or AstraZeneca, there's really minimal impact.
What about the overall picture in Australia at the moment, Omar? We have this cluster in Sydney that's sitting at more than 100 cases and a number of other cases in other states.
So what's happened is that Delta has gotten ahead of the New South Wales government. Unfortunately, that's why the lockdown was absolutely needed. It's been the right call. Perhaps a day or 2 late, which has allowed it to get out a little bit more than we would have hoped. But of course, we're seeing ongoing breaches in quarantine and this likely outbreak that's going to occur potentially across multiple states due to the mining incident. That came separately. It's come from hotel quarantine, from what we understand. And it just underlines the need for diligence right across the network when it comes to hotel quarantine itself, the drivers, as we've seen in New South Wales, the health staff, the workers. Everybody needs to be vaccinated. They need to be doing everything they can. It's not actually helpful to say, well, we don't want to use quarantine anymore in the hotels, because there is no alternative and there isn't going to be until Australia is fully vaccinated. So let's work at getting these hotels right. We know what needs to be done. The virus is being spread through the air, particularly with this Delta strain. That means separating people more in hotel quarantine and looking at those ventilation issues, doing everything possible to make sure we don't see these continued breaches because they are having a huge impact on the Australian population at the moment, and they'll continue to do so until we've all been vaccinated.
We won't have any of these purpose-built quarantine facilities if they are built by the end of the year. It might even go into next year. Does that concern you?
That's how long it takes to build new facilities. And unfortunately, we just don't have Howard Springs in every state and territory at the moment. So we just have to live with that reality, like we have to live with the fact that we can't get as much Pfizer vaccine as we want. And we need to plan around that. So that means making those hotels as safe as possible, listening to the new guidelines around personal protective equipment that came out that do apply to hotel quarantine. And every state and territory must make sure that every worker is vaccinated, both doses. If they haven't had that, then they're actually dangerous, not just to themselves, but to the rest of us. And of course, making sure that all those separation, all those airflow things are properly taken into account to minimise that risk. All these things are foreseeable. The virus does not spread by magic. It is spread through breathing in infected air, and that's something that can be controlled.
Hotel quarantine or quarantine facilities plus the vaccine is the first line of defence here. We've seen the changed advice for AstraZeneca, but what are your thoughts? What is the AMA's thoughts on opening up AstraZeneca to anyone who wants it with the proper advice from their doctor?
That's an attractive proposition because I know that a lot of young people are saying, well, I can assess this risk. This risk is actually extremely small and I'm happy to take that risk. However, the experts have modelled the risks and the benefits in an Australian context with outbreaks the size of what we've seen in Australia. And their recommendation is wait for Pfizer if you're under the age of 60. And we can't go against that. We're not experts the way that these committees are. And I think that the good thing about Pfizer, even though we have to wait now, is that you can get those 2 doses quite close together. And that means that younger people may be fully vaccinated at a fairly similar time to those older Australians who've already had access to AstraZeneca, but have had to wait that 3 months between the doses.
Indeed. Omar, Khorshid, thanks so much, as always, for your time in these uncertain times. We'll speak to you very soon.